evening light streamed through the windows of the living room, illuminating the walls adorned with colorful, hand-painted canvases. Meredith, a 45-year-old woman with brown hair streaked with silver strands and expressive eyes of the same hue, organized painting materials on the table in the living room-turned-makeshift studio. Her long, paint-stained fingers meticulously arranged the brushes as she glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 8 o'clock, and her son still hadn't arrived. She sighed deeply, accustomed to Grayson's tardiness. Since her husband's passing 8 years ago, she had dedicated her life to raising their son alone, dividing her time between the art classes she taught at the local school and the extra work she did painting commissioned pieces. Money was always tight, but they managed to live with dignity in the modest 2-bedroom house they had bought years ago. "He'll find his way, it's just a phase," she murmured to herself, repeating the mantra that sustained her during moments of worry about her son. The sound of keys jangling in the lock snapped her out of her thoughts. Grayson stumbled in, his dark hair disheveled and his red eyes betraying that he had once again drunk too much. Tall and lanky like his father, at 22 he bore a wasted beauty beneath deep bags and a perpetually bored expression. He wore clothes too expensive for the family's budget, gifts from the wealthy friends he cultivated during his nights out. Meredith watched her son with a mixture of love and disappointment as he unsuccessfully tried to hang his jacket on the coat rack by the door. "Grayson, you promised you'd be home for us to have dinner together today." "I made that pasta you like," she said, keeping her voice calm despite the evident disappointment in her eyes. "Sorry, Mom. Some commitments came up with the guys," he replied, dragging out the words as he flopped onto the couch, scattering pillows across the floor. "You didn't need to wait up for me. I'm all grown up now." His mother sighed deeply and began putting away her painting materials. Her latest work, a landscape commissioned for a local merchant's wife's birthday, needed to be delivered the next day. She would have to finish it in the early morning hours now. As she organized the paint pots, she observed her son out of the corner of her eye. Grayson had been a sweet, attentive boy until adolescence, when his father's death transformed him. The shared grief they experienced drove them apart instead of bringing them closer. Grayson sought refuge in questionable friendships and endless parties, while she immersed herself in work to keep the house and provide her son with opportunities she never had. "I'll make you a strong coffee. You need to be sober for that job interview early tomorrow," she reminded him, heading to the kitchen separated from the living room by a narrow counter. Grayson rolled his eyes and rose unsteadily, following her. "That accounting firm job? I cancelled it. I wasn't born to be stuck in a room staring at numbers all day long." The statement hit Meredith like a slap. It was the third interview he had cancelled that month. Since dropping out of college in his second semester, Grayson had been refusing any job opportunity that came his way, living off occasional gigs at parties and the money she saved through so much sacrifice. She took a deep breath, trying to control the frustration growing in her chest. With precise movements, she opened the cabinet above the sink to get the coffee grounds, and at that moment Grayson, still unsteady, leaned against the kitchen counter, accidentally knocking over a plastic box that was in the corner. "What's this? Why did you leave this thing here? What the hell happened here?" he shouted angrily as concentrated cleaning products spilled across the kitchen floor. The strong smell of mixed ammonia and bleach quickly filled the room. "Grayson, be careful!" "Those are the new products I bought to clean the bathroom," Meredith exclaimed in alarm, pulling her son away from the forming puddle. "Don't breathe it in and please open the window." The mixture on the floor began emitting a slightly greenish vapor. Meredith knew the danger of those chemicals when combined and quickly grabbed some rags to contain the spill before the reaction worsened. Grayson, still confused from the drunkenness, tried to help, but Meredith firmly pushed him away. "You're drunk and you're going to end up hurting yourself. Get out of the kitchen and open all the windows in the house," she ordered, with an authority she rarely displayed. Grayson grudgingly obeyed, muttering about his mother being over-dramatic and controlling. As he opened the windows in the living room, he heard a piercing scream coming from the kitchen that made him jump. He rushed back, suddenly sober from the terror in his mother's voice. Meredith was kneeling on the floor, her hands covering her face, moaning in pain. "Mom, what happened?" he shouted, kneeling beside her, his heart racing with panic. "My eyes! It splashed in my eyes!" she managed to say between moans, her body shaking with pain. Tears streamed through her fingers, mixing with the chemicals, intensifying the burning. Grayson felt the world spinning around him, but not from the alcohol. Terror gripped him as he grabbed the phone with trembling hands to call an ambulance. While they waited for help, he tried to flush his mother's eyes with clean water, following the emergency operator's instructions. But Meredith couldn't open her eyes. The pain was unbearable. Time seemed to drag as Grayson held his mother in his arms, repeating words of comfort that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "It's going to be okay, Mom. The ambulance is almost here. Please hold on," he whispered, tears streaming down his face as guilt consumed him from within. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Meredith was immediately taken in for treatment. Grayson, now completely sober, felt smaller than a grain of sand as he waited alone in the waiting room. Each minute felt like an eternity. The images of the accident replayed in his mind like a horror movie. If he hadn't arrived drunk, if he had been more careful, if he had at least arrived on time for dinner as he had promised. The weight of the consequences of his irresponsibility crushed his chest, making it difficult even to breathe. "If anything happens to her, I'll never forgive myself," he thought, as tears silently streamed down his now pale and dejected face. After what seemed like hours, a middle-aged doctor with a grave expression approached. His white coat contrasted with the deep dark circles that betrayed the long shift. Grayson leapt to his feet, his heart pounding so hard it could have jumped out of his mouth. The doctor asked him to sit back down and, with a controlled voice but without disguising the seriousness of the situation, began to explain Meredith's condition. "Mr. Grayson, we were able to stabilize your mother and control her pain. The mixture of chemicals that hit her eyes caused severe burns to her cornea and conjunctiva," he explained in a professional tone. "We performed all possible emergency procedures, but I need to be honest with you." Grayson clenched his hands with such force that his knuckles turned white. The ringing in his ears almost prevented him from hearing the doctor's next words. "I'm afraid the damage is irreversible. Your mother has lost her sight permanently." The words fell like a death sentence. Grayson felt the air being sucked from his lungs as the world seemed to crumble around him. The guilt, already overwhelming, transformed into something even more devastating, something he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. His mother, the woman who had dedicated everything to raising him, who had never given up on him despite all his failures, was now blind because of his irresponsibility. No, there must be something they can do. Treatments, surgeries, specialists. He mumbled desperately, his voice choked by suppressed tears. The doctor placed a hand on his shoulder with genuine compassion. "Unfortunately, the extent of the damage is too severe. We can seek other opinions, of course, and there are experimental treatments being developed, but I don't want to give false hope. She will need to learn to live with this new reality, and she will need you more than ever." These last words struck Grayson like a bolt of lightning. His mother would need him like never before. The strong and independent woman who had always taken care of everyone around her would now depend on help for the most basic tasks. Painting, her passion and livelihood, would be impossible in the permanent darkness into which she had been cast, and all because of him. "Can I see her?" he asked in a trembling voice, trying to contain his despair. "She is sedated at the moment, but you can go in for a few minutes. Just prepare yourself. She has bandages on her eyes and will likely remain that way for several weeks during the initial recovery process." Grayson followed the doctor through the white antiseptic corridors like a ghost, each step heavier than the one before. When he entered the room and saw his mother lying in the hospital bed, her small body seeming even smaller against the white sheets, he felt as if something inside him had broken. Meredith was pale, with large white bandages covering her eyes. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, drug-induced rhythm. Grayson approached hesitantly and took her hand in his, feeling her cold and fragile skin against his fingers. "Forgive me, Mum," he whispered, knowing she couldn't hear him. "Forgive me for failing you." The nurse monitoring Meredith's vitals gently commented that he could stay only a few more minutes. Grayson silently nodded, unable to let go of his mother's hand. He had never noticed how small yet strong her hands were, an artist's hands that had worked tirelessly for years, hands that had held him when he took his first steps, hands that would now have to learn to navigate a world of darkness. "I'll take care of you, I promise. I'll change, Mom. I'll be the son you deserve," he vowed in a low voice, feeling tears freely stream down his face. When he finally had to leave the room, Grayson felt utterly empty, as if his soul had been ripped from his body. He wandered aimlessly through the hospital corridors, his mind in complete chaos. Guilt consumed him like a fire, burning away all the excuses and justifications he used to make for his irresponsible behavior. There was no escaping the harsh truth. He had destroyed his own mother's life. "I'm a monster," he thought as he walked without direction. "How could I do this to the only person who never gave up on me?" Without realizing it, his steps led him to the hospital chapel. The small space was empty at that hour of the night, lit only by a few votive candles. Grayson wasn't religious. He had abandoned any faith along with so many other things after his father's death, but something drew him into that silent place. Perhaps a desperate need for redemption, perhaps merely a desire for a quiet space to process the tsunami of emotions that engulfed him. He sat on the last pew and watched the small flames of the candles flicker in the dimness. He remembered how his mother would light candles at home on the anniversaries of his father's death, how she kept his memory alive through small rituals that Grayson had always considered foolish and sentimental. Now those moments seemed sacred in his memory, moments when his mother displayed a quiet strength he had never truly appreciated. Grayson didn't notice when the tears started falling again, nor when he slid off the bench onto the cold floor. There, alone in the dark chapel, something broke inside him. Not like something shattering, but like a hard shell finally cracking to allow something new to grow. The entire facade of indifference and rebellion he had built crumbled, leaving exposed the scared, lost boy hiding behind it. "I don't know what to do," he whispered into the silence of the chapel, "but I know I can't keep being who I was." In that moment, kneeling on the cold floor of the hospital chapel, Grayson made the most important decision of his life. It wasn't a vague promise or an emotional oath made in the heat of the moment. It was a deep commitment, born of pain and regret, but made with a clarity he had never experienced before. "I will dedicate my life to caring for her and finding a cure, no matter how long it takes, how much it costs, or what I have to sacrifice." As he made this vow, he felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. Not the guilt, he knew it would always be there, a constant reminder of his mistake, but the burden of uncertainty about his future. For the first time in years, Grayson had a greater purpose than himself, something worth fighting for with all his might. "I will be the man she always believed I could be," he affirmed with renewed determination. When he finally got up, hours had passed. The sky beyond the narrow windows of the chapel was beginning to lighten with the first rays of dawn. Grayson strode out into the hallway, his face still marked by tears but his eyes reflecting an unwavering resolve. He needed to organize his thoughts, make concrete plans for the next few days and weeks. His mother would need special care, the house would have to be adapted, and he would need to find a steady job immediately. As he walked back to Meredith's room, Grayson mentally listed the changes he would need to make in his life. First, he would have to completely abandon parties and drinking. Second, he would have to resume the studies he had neglected. Third, he would find a job, any job, to start supporting the household while his mother recovered. And finally, he would tirelessly research treatments for blindness, even if he had to learn a new language or move to the other side of the world. "I won't give up on her like she never gave up on me," he promised himself as he silently entered the hospital room. Meredith was still asleep, the sedatives keeping her in a world without pain for a few precious hours. Grayson sat in the chair beside the bed and gently took her hand in his. The woman who had always been his rock, his safe harbor, seemed so fragile now. But he knew that behind that apparent fragility lay an extraordinary strength, a strength he hoped he could honor with his own actions from then on. "I will bring light back into your life, Mom, even if you can't see it," he whispered, gently squeezing her hand. "This is my promise to you." 15 years later, the morning light streamed through the ample windows of the office on the top floor of the glass tower in the city's financial center. Grayson, now 37, gazed out the panoramic view as he spoke on the phone. Time had transformed the once irresponsible youth into a man of commanding presence. Carefully trimmed dark hair with a few silver strands at the temples framed a face no longer marked by youthful indifference, but by lines of expression denoting determination and purpose. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, he radiated the confident air of one who had earned his place in the world through hard work and unwavering focus. His office reflected the same contrast between elegance and practicality that characterized its owner. Modern furnishings with clean lines, shelves lined with technical and business books, and an entire wall serving as a mural of news, articles, and research on treatments for blindness. At the center of his desk, in a silver frame, a photo of Meredith smiling, taken just days before the accident that changed their lives. The secretary tapped lightly on the half-open door, signaling an important call on line 2. Grayson nodded, quickly ended his current call and pressed the phone button. "Grayson speaking," he said in a deep, controlled voice. The voice on the other end of the line was unfamiliar, with a slight foreign accent. "Sir, we've been following your interest in optic nerve regeneration research. I believe we have information that would be of particular interest to you." Grayson leaned forward, instantly alert. Over the past 15 years, he had built a diversified business empire from scratch, beginning with small real estate investments, expanding into technology, and finally into the pharmaceutical sector. Each step meticulously planned with a single ultimate goal: to find or fund a cure for his mother's blindness. Over these years, he had sponsored dozens of studies, spoken with hundreds of experts, and maintained contact with virtually every serious institution working on visual regeneration in the world. "I'm listening," he replied, keeping his voice neutral despite the hope beginning to grow in his chest. "We found something promising abroad, Mr. Blackwood, but the cost is astronomical," the voice explained, while Grayson's eyes fixed on the photograph of his mother, the promise made 15 years ago as alive in his memory as the day he made it. "The price doesn't matter," he stated with absolute certainty. "Tell me more." Grayson adjusted the rear-view mirror of his luxury truck as he traversed the winding rural road. The sky, once a clear blue, was beginning to darken with heavy clouds rapidly approaching the horizon. The verdant fields around undulated with the breeze preceding the storm, creating an almost hypnotic scenery. He checked the clock on the dashboard. There were approximately 30 kilometers left until the farm he intended to evaluate, a property that, according to his advisors, could be transformed into an exclusive resort with expressive profits. Normally, his driver would accompany him on these business trips, but an unforeseen health issue had prevented him from coming. Grayson didn't mind driving. In fact, he appreciated these rare moments of solitude when he could organize his thoughts without constant interruptions from calls and meetings. The cell phone had lost signal a few kilometers ago, another disguised blessing. As he drove, his mind wandered between investment calculations and profit possibilities, not out of personal greed but out of an urgent need to increase his capital. "Every penny counts when you're funding experimental medical research," he thought, gripping the steering wheel tightly. 15 years, and I'm still so far from keeping my promise. The road began to climb at a steeper incline, leading to a mountainous stretch where the vegetation became denser. Grayson slowed down, noticing that the dark clouds now dominated the entire sky, turning the afternoon into an early dusk. The first thunderclap echoed in the distance, reverberating between the mountains like a somber warning. Grayson thought about turning back, but the meeting with the farm owner was scheduled for 2 hours from now, and he never cancelled appointments. This rigorous discipline had been the foundation upon which he'd built his empire over the past 15 years, transforming himself from a young man with no prospects into the respected businessman he was today. Every deal closed, every company acquired, every penny earned, it all had a single ultimate goal: to find a cure for his mother's blindness. The years had passed. Meredith had learned to live in darkness with admirable dignity, but Grayson had never abandoned his promise. The guilt over the accident still weighed on his shoulders like on the first day, an invisible burden he carried at every moment. "If only I could go back in time," he murmured to himself, watching the first heavy raindrops hit the windshield. "But the past is sealed. I can only work for a different future." The sky darkened completely in a matter of minutes, as if night had fallen suddenly. Grayson turned on the headlights and wipers, which now worked frantically against the rain, intensifying by the second. Visibility diminished drastically as the storm gained strength at an alarming pace. The wind lashed the surrounding vegetation, and the thunderclaps were no longer distant, but deafening explosions followed by lightning cutting across the sky in chaotic patterns. The road, once firm, began to soften under the force of the water, forming ever larger puddles that the truck traversed with increasing difficulty. Grayson realized he had underestimated the intensity of the storm, a mistake he rarely made. Ahead, a concrete bridge crossed a stream that was already overflowing with rainwater. Grayson accelerated slightly, feeling the pickup truck sway with the side wind that was now blowing in violent gusts, shaking the vehicle as if it were made of paper. "I've never seen anything like this," he said aloud, feeling a chill in his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "This is no ordinary storm." As he crossed the bridge, Grayson felt the structure tremble beneath the tires, a tremor that should not exist in a concrete construction. In the rearview mirror, he saw something that chilled his blood. The bridge was starting to crack, large chunks of concrete collapsing into the raging water below. In seconds, the entire structure collapsed with a roar that even overpowered the noise of the storm. Grayson swallowed hard, realizing how close he had come to disaster. Ahead, the road was becoming increasingly dangerous, with mud flowing down the side slopes and spilling onto the asphalt. The rain was now so intense that, even with the wipers at maximum speed, Grayson could barely see a few meters ahead. The navigation system had lost signal, and he began to doubt whether he could make it to the farm in these conditions. To his right, he heard a different roar, closer and more frightening than the thunderclaps. A massive tree, its roots torn out by the combination of wind and saturated soil, was falling directly toward him. Grayson slammed on the brakes, feeling the pickup truck skid on the wet road, spinning like an out-of-control carousel. "My God!" he shouted instinctively, struggling with the steering wheel as the vehicle continued its macabre dance along the road. Miraculously, the tree fell a few meters ahead, completely blocking the passage, but missing the pickup truck. Grayson breathed a momentary sigh of relief before feeling the vehicle continue sliding, now sideways towards the edge of the road, where a steep embankment awaited. He tried to counter-steer, but the tires found no traction in the mud. Time seemed to slow as the truck neared the abyss. Grayson felt the exact moment the right wheels lost contact with the ground, the vehicle precariously tilting over the embankment. With one last desperate effort, he flung open the door and threw himself out, rolling in the mud as he heard the groaning metal as the truck began sliding down the slope. Grayson dragged himself away from the edge, soaked and covered in mud, watching helplessly as his luxury vehicle disappeared into the vegetation, tumbling down the hillside until it struck some trees with a dull thud several meters below. The relentless rain continued to lash his body as he tried to get his bearings. He was alone, without a vehicle, without communication, in the midst of a storm that seemed determined to destroy everything in its path. Lightning illuminated the landscape in sporadic flashes, revealing the devastation around him: fallen trees, mudslides, the partially destroyed road. "I need to find shelter," he decided, forcing himself to stand despite the pain in his ribs where he had impacted the ground. "I won't survive much longer exposed to this storm." In one of those momentary flashes provided by the lightning, Grayson caught sight of something he had not noticed before: an old structure partially hidden among trees, perhaps 300 meters from the road. It looked like an abandoned farmhouse, with missing roof tiles and broken windows, but it was still a solid structure that would offer protection from the fury of the elements. Determined, Grayson began walking toward the house, struggling against the wind that seemed to push him back, and the mud that sucked his expensive shoes with every step. The rain reduced his visibility to almost nothing, forcing him to wait for the lightning to confirm he was heading in the right direction. His soaked suit weighed like lead, and the cold was starting to seep into his bones as he trudged forward. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally reached the building. The house was larger than he had initially imagined, a two-story structure that had probably been elegant decades ago before being abandoned to the elements and time. The front door was partially ripped off its hinges, swinging and banging with the wind. Grayson entered, finding immediate shelter from the rain, although the wind still came in through the numerous cracks in the walls and broken windows. "At least I'm not getting drenched anymore," he muttered, removing his heavy coat and wringing it out to remove excess water. "Now, I need to figure out if this place is safe." The interior of the house was in an advanced state of decay. Antique furniture covered by dusty sheets was scattered throughout the main room, creating ghostly shapes in the dim light. The wooden floor creaked underfoot, and the smell of mold permeated the air. Cobwebs decorated the corners of the ceiling, and small piles of debris accumulated in the corners where the roof had given way, allowing the rainwater to seep in. Grayson walked cautiously, testing the floor with each step to ensure it wouldn't give way under his weight. The storm raged outside, making the entire house structure groan like a living being. As he inspected the place, trying to find the safest spot to wait out the end of the storm, a different sound caught his attention, something that didn't belong to the noises of the storm or the old house settling. It was a rhythmic, continuous, almost methodical sound, coming from what seemed to be the back part of the house. Grayson froze, suddenly alert. He was not alone. The sound continued, indifferent to his presence. It sounded like someone working on something, a kind of constant and deliberate thudding. For a moment, he considered ignoring it and seeking other shelter, but the storm outside showed no signs of abating, and curiosity, or perhaps the instinct to know exactly what he was dealing with, compelled him to investigate. Who would be in an abandoned house during a storm like this, he thought, moving silently toward the sound. And what would they be doing? Grayson made his way down the dark hallway, passing empty rooms with peeling wallpaper and wood rotted by time and moisture. The sound grew clearer as he approached what he assumed to be the kitchen. A faint yellowish light seeped through the slightly ajar door, flickering like a candle. Cautiously, Grayson neared, prepared to encounter some homeless person who had made the abandoned house their temporary refuge, or perhaps a fugitive hiding from the law. What he found upon gently pushing the door open, however, completely defied his expectations. In the center of the old kitchen, illuminated by several candles strategically placed on the counter and table, stood a boy. Not a teenager, but a child who did not appear to be more than 10 years old. He had brown skin, straight black hair, and features that clearly indicated his indigenous descent. He wore simple, worn but clean clothes, and was completely focused on his task, grinding herbs in a dark wooden mortar, producing the rhythmic sound Grayson had followed. Around the boy were various pots containing plants, roots, and flowers, methodically organized. On the walls, hung on improvised ropes, other herbs were drying in orderly bunches. The boy worked with the precision and confidence of an experienced apothecary, measuring, separating, and processing plants with movements that seemed rehearsed for years. The scene was so unexpected, so displaced from the reality Grayson expected to find, that he was momentarily stunned, merely observing in silence. How is a child this age alone here? He wondered, noting the absence of any adult. And what is he doing with all these plants? Grayson must have made some involuntary noise, for the boy suddenly stopped his work and looked up. He showed no surprise or fear at seeing a drenched stranger standing at the door of his makeshift kitchen. His dark, deep, and serene eyes met Grayson's with a disconcerting intensity, as if they could see beyond the physical appearance, directly into his soul. Grayson felt a shiver that was unrelated to his wet clothes, or the wind still seeping through the cracks of the house. There was something in that child's eyes, an ancient wisdom, an impossible maturity for someone so young. The boy calmly set down the pestle, wiped his hands on a nearby cloth, and stood up. His posture was upright, dignified, almost like a small adult. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the noise of the storm outside and the occasional crackling of the candles. Grayson realized he should say something, explain his presence, ask if the boy was okay or if there was any adult around, but before he could formulate any question, the boy spoke. His voice was clear and firm, without the slightest trace of fear or hesitation, sounding strangely mature for his age. "I knew someone would come," he simply said, with a slight smile on his lips. "My grandmother told me before she died that I should wait here for the man who will change my destiny." The storm continued roaring outside the abandoned house, turning what should have been just another business meeting into an encounter that Grayson could never have foreseen. The boy's words echoed in his mind. How could such a young child speak with such certainty about destinies and premonitions? Recovering from his initial surprise, Grayson fully entered the kitchen, approaching cautiously. The candlelight created dancing shadows on the peeled walls, giving the setting an almost mystical air. The boy remained calm, watching him with those deep eyes that seemed to carry the knowledge of someone much older. Grayson then noticed the details of the small makeshift laboratory. Besides the mortar and pestle and herbs, there were small vials containing liquids of different colors, all organized with surprising precision. His wet clothes dripped onto the worn wooden floor, forming a small puddle at his feet. After the initial silence, he decided to introduce himself, trying to sound as friendly as possible despite the strangeness of the situation. "My name is Grayson. My vehicle nearly went off a cliff during the storm, and I needed to seek shelter," he explained, still trying to understand how a child could be completely alone in that decrepit house. "Are you here alone? Where are your parents?" The boy pointed to a wooden stool next to the table, inviting Grayson to sit. "My name is Jasper. You can take off those wet clothes if you want. I have a dry blanket over there in the corner. The fire in the living room fireplace is lit, but be careful with the ceiling on that side. It leaks when the rain is heavy." The boy's maturity and composure unsettled Grayson. Jasper showed no fear or anxiety, as would be expected of a child in such circumstances. Alone during a devastating storm, with a drenched stranger invading his space. On the contrary, he acted like a polite host, welcoming an expected visitor. Accepting the suggestion, Grayson retrieved the mentioned blanket and briefly went to the living room to check the fireplace. Indeed, a small fire crackled, providing a comfortable circle of warmth. He changed out of his soaked jacket and shirt and into the blanket, which had a scent of dried herbs, not unpleasant, but unusual. Upon returning to the kitchen, he found Jasper preparing something in a small pot over an improvised burner. A comforting aroma of herbs and spices filled the space. Grayson sat on the offered stool, watching the boy work with the dexterity of an experienced cook. "Do you live here permanently? How can you feed and survive alone in this place?" he asked, unable to contain his curiosity and growing concern for the child's well-being. Jasper slowly stirred the mixture in the pot before answering. "I've been here for months. My mother passed away some time ago. After that, my stepfather took me with him for a while, but one day he left me here, said he'd be back soon. He never showed up again." The candlelight flickered in the boy's unshed tears, the only indication that behind that composed demeanor was a child dealing with devastating losses. Grayson felt a tightness in his chest. The story was already tragic enough, but imagining a stepfather abandoning a child in an abandoned house in the middle of nowhere seemed like something out of a nightmare. Jasper continued his account as he poured a steaming liquid into 2 chipped mugs. The tea exuded an invigorating and complex aroma, blending herbal notes with something slightly sweet. Grayson accepted the offered mug, feeling the welcome warmth against his still cold hands. The boy sat on a chair on the other side of the table, his legs swinging without reaching the floor, a reminder of his true age despite his surprising self-reliance. "My grandmother was a healer in our tribe. From a young age, she taught me about plants, their healing powers, how to find them, how to prepare them. When she died, I continued learning from my mother, who also knew a lot about the ancient remedies," Jasper explained, gently blowing on his tea. "I don't go hungry because I know which plants are edible in the forest, and I have some seeds that I planted behind the house. I also trade remedies for food with people who pass by the road from time to time." Jasper's story unfolded as the night progressed, and the storm gradually diminished its fury. Grayson listened attentively, fascinated by the extraordinary resilience of that child. Between sips of the invigorating tea, I learned that Jasper belonged to a lineage of healers that dated back generations. His grandmother had been a respected woman sought after by people from various regions, known for treating diseases that conventional medicine considered incurable. The boy recounted how he had learned from a very early age to identify plants, prepare tinctures, poultices, and medicinal teas. He spoke about his mother, a gentle woman who suddenly fell ill and wasted away in a few months, despite all the remedies they tried. Grayson noticed how the boy's eyes lit up when speaking of traditional knowledge, and how his voice took on a deeper, more confident tone, almost as if channeling the ancestral wisdom he carried. "You have a special gift for someone so young." But a child should not live alone, especially under conditions like these, Grayson observed, feeling a growing sense of responsibility for the boy's well-being. Don't you have any other relatives who can take care of you? The storm outside was finally starting to subside, the thunder now distant. The rain turned into a constant but gentle patter on the damaged roof. The hours passed quickly as they conversed, and Grayson shared a bit of his own story, about his company, about how he had worked tirelessly to build his wealth, although he omitted the reasons behind his almost obsessive dedication. He noticed that Jasper watched him with a peculiar attention, as if absorbing every word and expression, analyzing him in a way few adults could. When the subject of family came up again, Grayson hesitated momentarily before mentioning his mother, feeling that familiar pang of guilt that never left him. "I only have my mother now. She is an extraordinary woman despite the difficulties she faces," he said, carefully choosing his words. "It's for her that I work so hard." That night in the abandoned house, illuminated only by candles and the gentle fire in the fireplace, created a temporal bubble where two strangers, a successful 37-year-old businessman and a 10-year-old orphan boy, shared stories, fears, and hopes. Grayson found himself telling Jasper things he rarely mentioned to anyone, as if the boy's combined innocence and wisdom created a safe space for vulnerabilities. He spoke about losing his father early, about the financial struggles they faced, about how his mother had always believed in him even when he had given up on himself. Eventually, when sleep began to weigh on both their eyelids, Grayson improvised beds with the few blankets available in the room, close to the fireplace to combat the cold that intensified as the early morning hours progressed. "I never imagined I would find a child like you in this place. It seems almost predestined," Grayson murmured, observing the moisture-stained ceiling as he settled onto the blanket spread on the floor. "Tomorrow, when the storm has completely passed, we need to find a proper solution for you." When the first rays of sunlight penetrated the broken windows of the abandoned house, Grayson awoke to the singing of birds, a surprising contrast to the violence of the previous night's storm. He rose silently, noticing that Jasper was already awake and had gone out. Worried, Grayson searched for the boy, finding him in the backyard of the house, where a small, improvised garden had miraculously survived the storm. The child was gathering some leaves and roots, moving with the same methodical precision he had demonstrated the night before. Around them, the devastation was evident: fallen trees, broken branches, the muddy ground. But the sky was a clear blue, as if nature wanted to make up for the fury it had displayed. Grayson approached slowly, pensive. During the night, an idea had formed in his mind, an idea that initially seemed absurd, but now in the light of day began to make perfect sense. "Good morning," he greeted, watching the boy work. "I've been thinking about your situation. I can't simply leave you here alone." The morning progressed as they both examined the damage caused by the storm. Grayson's truck was irretrievably damaged at the bottom of the ravine, as was his cell phone that had been left in the vehicle. The road was partially blocked by fallen trees and landslides, making the way back a considerable challenge. As they shared a simple breakfast of fruits and roots that Jasper prepared, Grayson finally voiced the proposal he had been considering since waking up. He explained that he had more than enough resources to offer the boy a fresh start, a safe home, quality education, and the opportunity to develop his knowledge of medicinal plants under proper conditions, with access to books, laboratories, and specialists who could complement his traditional knowledge. As he spoke, Grayson noticed the boy's growing hesitation. "Come with me, Jasper. I can give you a home and education." "A new life," Grayson offered, realizing he needed to convince the boy of his good intentions. "I'm not trying to replace your family, just offering an opportunity I believe your grandmother and mother would want you to have." The distrust in Jasper's eyes was understandable. After all, he had already been abandoned by an adult he trusted, his stepfather. Why should he believe the promises of a stranger? Grayson recognized that he would need more than words to gain the boy's trust. On an impulse, he took his wallet out of the pocket of his still damp pants and pulled out a slightly water-damaged photograph. It was an image of Meredith, his mother, sitting in a garden, her eyes fixed on a distant, unfocused point. Even in the photograph, her dignity and kindness were evident, despite the affliction that ailed her. Grayson extended the photograph to Jasper, feeling a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to display. "This is my mother, Meredith. She has been blind for 15 years. Because of me," he revealed, his voice choked with contained emotion. "Everything I've built, my entire pursuit of success, has a single purpose: to find a cure for her, to restore the vision I took from her through my recklessness." That unexpected confession altered something in the dynamic between them. Jasper took the photograph with reverent care, studying it intently. His small fingers traced the contours of Meredith's face, as if trying to sense the essence of the woman through the image. When he finally returned the photograph, his eyes had changed, the distrust replaced by a new determination. Grayson understood, in that silent moment, that he had established a true connection with the boy. It wasn't just the offer of a home or education that had convinced Jasper, but the revelation of a genuine vulnerability, of shared pain. They both carried deep losses, both sought redemption in their own way. "I'll go with you," Jasper simply said, beginning to gather his most precious belongings: his grandmother's ancient mortar, some rare herbs, small vials of medicinal preparations. "Perhaps I can help your mother in some way." The journey back to civilization was arduous. They walked along the damaged road, skirting obstacles and helping each other through the toughest stretches. Grayson carried Jasper's small bundle of belongings, while the boy occasionally stopped to examine plants by the roadside, explaining their medicinal properties with the subdued enthusiasm that seemed to characterize him. After a few hours of walking, they found a vehicle heading towards the nearest town. The driver, impressed by the story of the storm and recognizing Grayson's name, readily offered them a ride. During the journey, Grayson watched Jasper gazing out the window with silent curiosity, probably seeing landscapes and buildings he had never encountered before. "You'll like my house." "It's too big for one person alone. It's always felt too empty for me," Grayson commented, trying to prepare the boy for the radical change he would experience. "And I'm sure my mother will love to meet you." Upon arriving in town, Grayson immediately arranged new clothes for Jasper, noting how the boy seemed simultaneously fascinated and uncomfortable with the bustling stores and the attention he received. After a hearty meal at a quiet restaurant, another new experience for the boy, they headed to Grayson's residence. The property was impressive even by local standards. A sprawling estate with well-tended gardens, a modern main mansion, and adjacent to it, a smaller but equally elegant house where Meredith lived. Grayson explained that he had designed this arrangement to give his mother independence while keeping her close enough to monitor her well-being daily. As they approached Meredith's house, Grayson noticed how Jasper suddenly seemed nervous, repeatedly adjusting the collar of his new shirt. "You don't need to be anxious. My mother is the kindest person I know," he assured, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "She developed a special sensitivity for understanding people after losing her sight." Meredith was sitting in a comfortable armchair on the porch of her home when they arrived. Despite her blindness, she seemed to have sensed their approach, turning her face towards the sound of footsteps. She was a woman of 60, with elegantly styled grey hair and a posture that radiated serenity. Her face, marked by soft lines of expression, lit up as she recognized her son's steps. Grayson introduced Jasper, briefly explaining how he had found him during the storm. He omitted the more concerning details, the abandonment by his stepfather, the months living alone, choosing instead to focus on the boy's exceptional knowledge of medicinal plants and his current orphaned situation. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Jasper," said Meredith, extending her hand in the approximate direction of the boy. "Grayson rarely brings visitors. You must be very special." What happened next deeply surprised Grayson. Jasper, who had displayed composure and maturity throughout the ordeal, approached Meredith with an almost solemn reverence. He took her outstretched hand between his small hands with extraordinary care, as if touching something infinitely precious. The smile that appeared on his face was the most genuine and childlike Grayson had seen until then, a reminder that despite all his forced self-reliance, Jasper was still just a child, longing for connection and affection. Most surprising, however, was Meredith's reaction. Her expression changed instantly upon contact with the boy, a mixture of surprise and recognition passing across her face. Her sensitive fingers gently explored Jasper's hands, as if reading an invisible story in them that others could not see. "You have a healer's hands, young Jasper," she observed in a soft voice. "Hands that know the value of plants and the rhythm of nature." The connection between Meredith and Jasper was immediate and profound, startling Grayson with its intensity. As he watched, the two engaged in a conversation that flowed as if they were old acquaintances, reunited after a long separation. Jasper shared stories about his grandmother and his people's healing traditions, speaking with surprising eloquence. Meredith listened attentively, asking insightful questions that demonstrated genuine interest and respect for the boy's knowledge. Grayson realized he needed to deal with the consequences of the storm: his disrupted schedule, the destroyed vehicle, cancelled commitments. He explained that he would need to be absent for a few hours to address urgent matters related to the damage caused by the storm and his pressing business. It was then that Meredith, visibly enchanted by the boy's stories about medicinal herbs and indigenous traditions, made an unexpected invitation. "Why don't you stay here with me while Grayson takes care of his affairs? I would love to hear more about the plants your grandmother taught you. We can prepare a room for you to spend the night," she suggested, her face alight with an enthusiasm Grayson hadn't seen in years. Grayson hesitated, feeling suddenly protective of his mother. After all, he barely knew the boy, despite the unusual connection they had established. Jasper sensed his hesitation and lowered his eyes, clearly disappointed but resigned, accustomed to having his hopes dashed. That expression stirred something in Grayson, the memory that behind the impressive maturity was a vulnerable child who had suffered too many abandonments. Meredith, with that heightened perception she had developed to compensate for her lack of sight, seemed to sense her son's indecision. "Grayson, trust me. This young man has much to share, and I'm sure we can take care of each other for a few hours," she gently insisted, reaching out to find her son's arm. "Besides, it's been a long time since I felt so excited to talk to someone." After a few moments of consideration, Grayson finally agreed, albeit reluctantly. He discreetly instructed the governess about the situation and asked her to stay vigilant, even though he knew it was likely an unnecessary precaution. Before leaving, he briefly knelt to be at Jasper's height, adjusting the collar of the boy's new shirt with an almost paternal gesture that arose instinctively. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Take good care of her for me, okay?" he asked, surprised by the trust he placed in this child he had known for less than 24 hours. Grayson bid farewell and headed for the exit. He was almost at the door when he realized Jasper had approached Meredith again. The boy leaned in and whispered something in her ear, words inaudible to Grayson. His mother's reaction was immediate and shocking. Her entire body shuddered as if she had received an electric shock. Her hand gripped Jasper's with surprising force, her face pale with astonishment. Grayson froze, alarmed by the intensity of his mother's reaction, ready to intervene if necessary. But what Meredith said next left him completely stunned. "How could you know that? I never told anyone about that dream," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion and awe as she held the boy's hand as if it were an anchor in a sea of confusion. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of the guest room where Jasper had slept. The boy awoke early, as he was accustomed to since living in the abandoned house. For a moment, he felt disoriented by the comfort of the soft mattress and perfumed sheets, so different from the hard ground where he had slept for the past few months. He then remembered the events of the previous day, the storm, the encounter with Grayson, the arrival at Meredith's house. He sat up in bed, curiously observing the elegant yet cozy room. The pastel-colored walls displayed some paintings of natural landscapes, and the light wood furniture perfectly matched the serene atmosphere of the environment. Jasper rose silently, dressed in the new clothes Grayson had bought for him, and approached the window. From there he could see the lush garden surrounding the house, a well-tended space with organized flower beds, a small fountain at the center, and stone paths winding between the vegetation. His experienced eyes soon identified several plants he recognized, some ornamental, others with medicinal properties his grandmother had taught him to value. The sight awakened in him an immediate curiosity and a familiar sense of purpose. "How many powerful plants are growing there, with no one to recognize their healing gifts," he murmured to himself, opening the window to feel the fresh morning breeze. "I need to take a closer look at what this garden is hiding." Jasper left the room, walking silently through the corridors of the house. He heard soft noises coming from the kitchen, probably someone preparing breakfast. Resisting the temptation to follow the inviting aroma of fresh bread, he headed for the door leading to the garden. Stepping barefoot on the grass still damp with dew, he felt an immediate connection with that space. Unlike the wild terrain around the abandoned house, this garden was meticulously planned, yet still rich in diverse species. Jasper began to walk among the flower beds, occasionally crouching to examine a leaf or flower more closely. His fingers gently caressed the plants, as if conversing with them through touch. He recognized lemon balm, chamomile, lavender, rosemary, common plants used for teas and aromas. But his experienced gaze also identified lesser-known species: euphrasia, whose folk name was eyebright for its benefits to eye problems; trumpet vine, whose anti-inflammatory properties were utilized by his tribe in specific preparations; and wild passionflower, whose flowers and leaves contained powerful calming components. Each discovery increased his enthusiasm, and soon he was completely absorbed in his exploration, oblivious to the passing time. "It's as if this garden has been waiting for me," he marveled at the diversity he found. "Some of these plants are exactly the ones my grandmother used to treat vision issues." The sun was already higher when Jasper finally decided he had explored enough. With reverent care, he collected small amounts of certain herbs and flowers, only what was necessary, as his grandmother had taught him, never wasting or harming the plants. In his small hands accumulated euphrasia leaves, calendula petals, young trumpet vine leaves, and some other herbs whose folk names varied by region, but whose beneficial properties for the eyes were well known in his people's traditional medicine. Jasper knew exactly what he would do with those ingredients. Throughout the previous night, while conversing with Meredith, he had observed the dignity with which she faced her blindness, but had also perceived the profound sadness that occasionally escaped in her voice when she mentioned how much she missed seeing colors, faces, the paintings she once created. The boy had felt firsthand how heavily Grayson carried the weight of guilt over the accident, a guilt so burdensome that it had shaped his entire adult life. His grandmother's words echoed in his memory: "The true healer treats not only the body but also the wounded soul." Jasper now had a clear purpose that transcended his own uncertain situation. "She deserves to see the world again, and he deserves to free himself from this guilt," he said to himself, looking determinedly at the plants in his hands. "If there is anyone I can help with my knowledge, it is them." Jasper returned to the house with his precious harvest. He went to the kitchen, where he found Meredith preparing something that smelled deliciously of cinnamon and vanilla. She moved through the space with the confidence of someone who knew every inch perfectly, the result of years adapting to blindness. Her movements were precise and graceful, surprising for someone deprived of sight. Jasper watched her for a moment, admiring her independence. When he finally announced his presence with a soft "good morning," Meredith turned toward his voice with a warm smile. She invited him to sit at the kitchen table, where she had already prepared a snack: fresh bread, sliced fruit, and a bowl of oatmeal with honey. The boy accepted the invitation, but did not set aside his harvest, carefully placing it on a cloth napkin. Meredith noticed by the sound that he had brought something with him and, with that heightened perception of the other senses that the blind often develop, asked about what he was carrying. Jasper enthusiastically explained about his morning exploration of the garden and the medicinal plants he had found. As he spoke, he mentally elaborated on the preparation process he would use, the exact proportions, the extraction method, the ritual words that would accompany the preparation, as his grandmother had taught him. "Your garden is amazing, Meredith. It has plants that my grandmother considered sacred for their healing power," he shared with genuine enthusiasm, as he methodically separated each ingredient. "Some of them are especially powerful for eye problems." After the snack, Jasper asked permission to use some kitchen utensils. Meredith, intrigued and touched by the boy's interest, not only consented but offered to help with whatever was needed. With admirable patience, Jasper guided Meredith's hands so that she could feel each plant, explaining its properties and how his grandmother used them. The connection between them deepened during that shared activity, the boy's ancestral knowledge meeting the older woman's respect and openness. Using a small ceramic mortar he found in the kitchen, Jasper began the meticulous process of grinding the herbs, adding a few drops of pure water to form a paste. He then filtered the mixture through a fine cloth, extracting a clear liquid with a slight amber hue. Throughout the process, he murmured words in his native language, not just technical instructions he had memorized, but invocations and prayers that were an integral part of the healing ritual. Finally, he transferred the precious liquid to a small glass bottle Meredith provided, carefully sealing it. My grandmother used to say that the remedy is only half the cure. The other half lies in the faith of the receiver and the intention of the preparer, Jasper explained, holding the bottle up to the light to examine the clarity of the liquid. This extract has the power to help eyes heal, but only if the heart is ready. Time passed quickly as they worked together. Meredith listened intently to each explanation, fascinated by the wisdom emanating from this 10-year-old child. There was something in Jasper's voice, in the confidence of his movements that transcended his chronological age, as if, through him, spoke the accumulated experience of generations of healers. When he finally finished the preparation, a meaningful silence filled the kitchen. Jasper held the small vial in his hands, contemplating it with a mixture of hope and apprehension. On his mind weighed the responsibility of what he was about to propose. His grandmother had always emphasized the sacred duty of the healer to never promise cures he could not deliver, to never raise false hopes. But she had also taught him to recognize when a remedy was meant for a specific person, when the confluence of circumstances, plants, and need created a unique opportunity for true healing. Jasper felt, with a certainty he could not rationally explain, that this was one of those moments, that his presence in that house, on that day, with those specific plants, was no mere coincidence. "Mrs. Meredith, I found in your garden the same plants my grandmother used to cure eye diseases," he finally said, approaching her with the vial. "I made a remedy that may help you, but it will only work if you have true faith." Meredith's expression transformed upon hearing the boy's words. Her lips parted in surprise, and her hands, always so steady in their movements, trembled slightly. For 15 years, specialists from around the world had examined her case, invariably declaring the damage irreversible, that no surgery or treatment could restore her sight. Grayson had spent fortunes consulting the best ophthalmologists, funding experimental research, always hoping for a miracle that modern science insisted was impossible. And now this boy she barely knew was offering her hope with a homemade remedy made from herbs from his own garden. Skepticism battled against hope in her heart. But there was something about Jasper's voice, a crystalline sincerity, a quiet certainty that didn't seem like youthful arrogance, but rather ancestral knowledge, that touched her deeply. She felt tears forming behind her useless eyelids, tears not of sadness, but of a complex emotion she couldn't name. "How can you be so sure, Jasper?" "Doctors around the world have said my condition is permanent," she questioned softly, her voice betraying the hope she tried to contain. "What makes you think you can achieve what modern medicine could not?" Jasper asked Meredith to sit in the most comfortable chair in the room. With gentle, assured gestures, he guided her there, demonstrating a care that seemed instinctive. He positioned himself in front of her, holding the vial with the precious liquid. The natural light streaming in through the room's large windows created an almost ethereal atmosphere, sunrays dancing through the amber liquid in the vial, projecting tiny rainbows on the boy's hands. Jasper explained in a calm voice that the remedy he had prepared was not just a physical solution for her eyes, but a catalyst for a deeper healing that involved body, mind, and spirit. For it to work fully, Meredith would need to open her heart to the possibility of healing, release any negative emotions that could block the process, and most importantly, she would need to forgive completely. "You need to wholeheartedly forgive all the people who have wronged you, especially your son," and she needed to believe that she would see again, Jasper instructed, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. "Without true forgiveness, without genuine faith, the remedy will be nothing more than herb-infused water." Meredith closed her eyes, an automatic gesture even for one who could not see, and took a deep breath. She thought of Grayson, the reckless young man he had been, the dedicated man he had become. The truth was that she had never really blamed him for the accident. The pain she felt came from seeing her son flagellating himself with a guilt she had never imposed on him. How many times had she tried to convince him that she had forgiven him completely, that the accident had been just that, an unfortunate accident, not an unforgivable crime. But Grayson had built his entire adult life around that guilt, as if he constantly needed to prove his worth, to make up for a mistake she had long ago forgotten. If there was anything Meredith desired more than regaining her own sight, it was to see her son free from that burden. "I'm ready," she finally said, straightening up in her chair with serene determination. "I believe in you, Jasper, and I believe in the possibility of healing." Jasper then began a ritual that seemed far older than his 10 years. With precise, reverent movements, he uncapped the vial and approached Meredith. He asked her to tilt her head back slightly and relax completely. With one hand, he gently held her chin to stabilize her position. The other hand held the vial with the medicinal liquid. He began to recite words in his native tongue, a prayer or incantation passed down through generations, words whose exact meaning he may not have fully understood himself, but whose power he revered. The childish voice took on a surprising resonance, filling the room with its rhythmic, melodious cadence. Meredith felt an unusual energy emanating from the boy, like waves of heat radiating from his small body. It was a difficult sensation to describe, a tingling that began in her hands, where Jasper touched her and gradually spread throughout her body. "Trust the process. Don't resist the feeling," Jasper instructed, briefly interrupting his chanting. "I'm going to apply the remedy now. It may sting a little at first." At that crucial moment, the front door burst open abruptly. Grayson entered the house, carrying a bouquet of fresh flowers for his mother, a morning ritual he maintained whenever possible. As he turned into the living room and witnessed the scene, Jasper leaning over his mother, an unknown liquid about to be applied to her eyes, his face transformed instantly. The bouquet fell to the floor, petals scattering across the polished wooden floor. Within seconds, the initial shock turned to panic and fury. To Grayson, the scene confirmed his worst fears. He had trusted a stranger, allowed him to be alone with his vulnerable mother, and now this person was apparently about to do something potentially dangerous to her. All the years of obsessive protection, all the promises to keep her safe, seemed betrayed in that single moment. "My God, what are you doing to my mother?" he shouted, running toward them with heavy steps that reverberated through the floorboards. Grayson's scream broke Jasper's concentration, but not before a few drops of the medicinal liquid fell into Meredith's eyes. The boy turned, startled, still holding the vial. Grayson determinedly pulled the boy away from his reach, guiding him back toward his mother. The abrupt movement caused some of the remaining liquid to spill onto Jasper's clothes. Grayson was beside himself, accusations pouring from his mouth as he shook the boy, demanding explanations. Jasper tried to answer, explain the nature of the remedy, but his words were drowned out by Grayson's furious shouts. Chaos had replaced the serene atmosphere of moments before. It was then that a terrible sound interrupted the discussion, a cry of pain coming from Meredith. She had brought her hands to her eyes, her entire body contracting in spasms of agony. Grayson immediately released Jasper and ran to his mother, supporting her as she screamed. Tears streamed from her closed eyes, but they were not normal tears. They had a strange, slightly greenish coloration. "What did you do to her?" "What poison is this?" Grayson accused, his face contorted with panic as he tried to comfort his mother, who was now trembling uncontrollably. "I'm calling an ambulance immediately." As Grayson used the phone to call for help, casting accusatory glances at Jasper between desperate phrases, the boy remained paralyzed, an expression of horror and confusion on his young face. This should not be happening. The remedy could cause slight initial discomfort, a warming sensation, perhaps even moderate pain, but nothing like the violent reaction Meredith was having. Jasper hesitantly approached, trying to examine her condition more closely, but Grayson pushed him away with a furious shove. The minutes that followed were a blur of frantic activity. The arrival of the ambulance, paramedics invading the house with equipment and stretchers, urgent questions about what had happened, what had been applied to the patient's eyes. Grayson accused Jasper of poisoning his mother with some unknown potion, while the boy desperately tried to explain the composition of the remedy. "It's just medicinal herbs from her garden. It's not poison, it's a traditional eye remedy," Jasper insisted, tears streaming down his face as the paramedics transferred Meredith to the stretcher. "Please believe me." Meredith was quickly prepared for transport, an intravenous line already set up on her arm for the administration of emergency medication. Grayson informed that he would follow the ambulance in his own car, casting one last withering look at Jasper before leaving. The boy ran after him, clinging to the car door before Grayson could close it. His pleading eyes met Grayson's, which were overflowing with rage and betrayal. At that moment, the successful and powerful businessman saw only the imprudence of having trusted the word of an unknown child, putting at risk the only person who truly mattered in his life. He was about to order Jasper away when something in the boy's expression made him hesitate. It wasn't fear of punishment he saw there, but a genuine concern that mirrored his own. "Please take me with you," Jasper begged, clinging to the door with surprising strength for someone so small. "I need to be there to complete the healing process." In the back seat of Grayson's car, Jasper sat in tense silence, occasionally casting anxious glances towards the ambulance they followed closely. The sirens cut through the morning air, clearing a path through the city traffic. Grayson kept his eyes fixed on the road, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. His face was a mask of worry and barely contained fury. He had allowed Jasper to accompany them only because, in his haste to reach the hospital, he didn't want to waste time arguing or dealing with the boy's situation. He planned to hand him over to the authorities as soon as his mother was being properly cared for. The oppressive silence inside the vehicle was finally broken by Jasper's voice, frail but determined. Through tears, the boy tried to explain again what had happened, insisting that Meredith's reaction, although more intense than expected, was part of the healing process. He spoke about how his grandmother had mentioned rare cases where the body violently reacted before the cure, especially when the condition had been established for many years. "Please don't leave me at the hospital," Jasper begged, leaning forward, tears freely streaming down his tanned face. "What's happening to her is part of the cure. If you abandon me now, your mother will never open her eyes again." The hospital's automatic doors opened with a mechanical hiss as the gurney carrying Meredith was quickly wheeled inside. Fluorescent lights illuminated the emergency corridor with an impersonal and cold brightness, so different from the golden morning light that bathed the room where it all began. Grayson followed the gurney with hurried steps, his face a mask of worry. Jasper ran by his side, trying to keep pace with the adult's longer strides. The boy's words in the car had planted a seed of doubt in Grayson's mind, not enough to overcome his anger and distrust, but enough to allow the boy to accompany them inside. The medical team moved with rehearsed efficiency, transferring Meredith to an emergency room while connecting monitors and equipment. Her spasms had subsided during the journey, replaced by an unsettling stillness. A middle-aged doctor with deep bags under his eyes and a grave expression took charge, barking precise orders to the team as he quickly examined Meredith's eyes with a small flashlight. The questions came in rapid succession. What had been applied to her eyes, how long since exposure, what were her pre-existing medical conditions? Grayson answered mechanically, his trembling voice contrasting with the clinical and controlled tones of the professionals around him. When he mentioned that Meredith had been blind for 15 years due to a chemical burn, the doctor cast a significant look at the team. "We'll need an ophthalmologist immediately and prepare for a full eye wash," the doctor ordered, turning to Grayson with a grave expression. "Sir, I need you to wait in the waiting room. We will do everything possible for your mother." The waiting room at the hospital was a study in human anguish. Neutral-toned walls, futilely attempting to create an atmosphere of calm, uncomfortable chairs arranged in orderly rows, piles of outdated magazines stacked on low tables that no one really read. Grayson collapsed into a chair in the farthest corner, his body exhausted, but his mind racing in a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. Jasper sat silently in the chair beside him, his feet dangling without touching the ground, visually reminding how much he was still just a child, despite the responsibility he had assumed. The minutes dragged like hours. Grayson would occasionally get up to inquire about news at the information desk, only to return with the same frustrating answer. "The doctors are still with her. We'll let you know as soon as we hear anything." His shirt, normally impeccable, was rumpled and stained with Meredith's tears. His hands, which habitually commanded companies and closed multi-million-dollar deals, now trembled slightly. With each return without news, his glance towards Jasper became more accusatory, as if the lack of information only confirmed his worst suspicions. When the silence between them became unbearably heavy, Grayson finally exploded, unable to contain the emotional storm brewing inside him any longer. "What substance did you put in her eyes? What did you do to my mother?" He lashed out, whirling sharply towards Jasper, his voice low but laced with intensity so as not to draw attention from others in the waiting room. Jasper straightened in his chair, meeting Grayson's gaze directly. Despite the silent tears trailing down his cheeks, his demeanor was not one of guilt or fear, but of serene conviction. His deep, dark eyes, like ancient wells, found Grayson's with an intensity that made the older man momentarily falter. There was something unsettling about the way that child looked at him, not with the apprehension that would be expected from someone in his position, but with the calm of someone who knows truths that others still need to discover. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but firm, each word pronounced with deliberate clarity, as if imparting precious knowledge that could not be misinterpreted. "It's her last chance. Her body is fighting against the darkness. It just needs a little more time." "And your faith," Jasper replied, his small hands resting on his knees in an almost meditative posture. "Sometimes, for the light to return, the darkness must be fully faced." The enigmatic words of the boy provoked a mixture of frustration and perplexity in Grayson. Part of him wanted to shake Jasper, demand concrete explanations, medical terms, precise chemical descriptions of what had been put in his mother's eyes. Another part, however, remembered the instant connection between Meredith and the boy, the way his mother seemed to recognize something in the child that escaped his own perception. The most anguished hours often provoke profound questioning, and Grayson found himself confronting doubts he would normally keep buried under layers of pragmatic rationality. What if there were forms of healing that modern science still did not fully understand? Did his own obstinate search for experimental treatments not suggest a tacit belief that the limitations of current medicine were not definitive? These reflections were abruptly interrupted when a different doctor, wearing a lab coat with a badge identifying him as a neurologist, approached them with a clipboard in hand and an intrigued expression. "Mr. Blackwood, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" the doctor requested, casting a curious glance at Jasper before indicating a more secluded corner of the room. Grayson followed the doctor, shooting Jasper a warning look and silently ordering him to stay exactly where he was. The neurologist, a tall man with graying hair at the temples and thin-framed glasses, briefly consulted his notes before beginning to speak. He explained that Meredith had been stabilized and that the ophthalmologists had performed a complete eye flushing to remove any potentially toxic substances. However, what intrigued them was what they had discovered in the preliminary neurological exams. The electroencephalograms showed highly unusual patterns of brain activity, especially in the occipital areas related to visual processing. In a long-term blind patient, those areas would typically show reduced or significantly altered activity. Yet Meredith's scans showed the opposite, an intense and increasing activation, as if decades of dormancy were being suddenly reversed. The doctor chose his words carefully, avoiding premature speculation, but his expression betrayed a barely concealed professional astonishment. "Frankly, I've never seen anything like this before," the neurologist admitted, showing Grayson the complex graphs that meant little to a layperson. "It's as if her brain is relearning how to see." Grayson returned to Jasper's side with slow steps and a confused mind. The medical terms and technical explanations still echoed in his consciousness, but what truly struck him was the tone of barely concealed astonishment in the neurologist's voice. Doctors, especially experienced specialists, rarely demonstrated surprise. They were accustomed to the complexities and idiosyncrasies of the human body. That something could provoke that reaction indicated how truly unusual Meredith's situation was. He sat back down beside Jasper, regarding him with new eyes. Anger was still present, but now it blended with something else, a faint, reluctant curiosity. The boy had remained exactly where he had been left, but his posture had subtly changed. His eyes were half closed, lips moving silently as if reciting prayers or incantations. His small hands made delicate movements in the air, almost imperceptible to any casual observer. Grayson felt an involuntary shiver run down his spine as he realized that, even physically separated from Meredith, Jasper seemed to continue some kind of invisible work, a connection that transcended walls and distance. When the boy finally opened his eyes fully and noticed Grayson watching him, his gaze was not one of guilt or apprehension, but of quiet determination. "What did the doctors say?" Jasper asked directly, as if he already knew that something unusual had been discovered. "They noticed the changes starting, didn't they?" The following hours passed in an agonizing limbo. Grayson alternated between long vigils, sitting beside Jasper, and short walks through the sterile hallways of the hospital, trying to organize his thoughts. Occasionally, doctors or nurses would come with updates. Meredith had been transferred to the intensive care unit. Her condition was stable, but she remained unconscious. The tests continued to show intriguing results. Each new piece of information was relayed to Jasper, not because Grayson had consciously decided to trust the boy, but because something in those eyes, too wise for his age, demanded honesty. Grayson's internal conflict intensified with every passing hour. His education and life experience had conditioned him to trust science, modern medicine, rational explanations for observable phenomena. However, he now faced something that defied easy categorization. A child who spoke with authority about ancestral cures, experienced doctors perplexed by inexplicable readings, and his own mother at the center of this enigma. As the sun began to set, casting orange shadows through the hospital windows, Grayson returned from another brief walk to find Jasper exactly where he had left him, but now with his eyes closed, apparently asleep from exhaustion. The very moment he approached, the boy opened his eyes suddenly, as if he had sensed his presence. "It's almost time," Jasper said with surprising certainty, straightening up in the chair. "She's coming back to us." Grayson opened his mouth to question that enigmatic statement, but was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a nurse running toward him, her face a mix of professional urgency and barely contained astonishment. Her white shoes squeaked against the polished hospital floor, the hurried movement drawing curious looks from other patients and visitors in the waiting room. She stopped in front of Grayson, briefly catching her breath before delivering the message that would change everything. "Mr. Blackwood, your mother has woken up," she announced, her eyes wide with excitement. "The doctors are with her now. They asked that you come immediately." Grayson felt his legs momentarily weaken, a mixture of relief and apprehension taking hold of him. Jasper was already on his feet, as if he had anticipated this very moment. Together, they followed the hurried nurse through the labyrinthine corridors of the hospital, the contrast between Grayson's long and urgent strides and Jasper's small but determined steps creating an odd choreography. The nurse spoke rapidly as they walked, explaining that Meredith had awoken suddenly, surprising the medical team monitoring her vital signs. Her condition seemed stable, but the doctors were cautious, conducting rapid neurological assessments. As they reached the intensive care room door, the nurse hesitated briefly, casting a questioning glance at Jasper. Before she could voice her doubt about the suitability of allowing a child into that restricted area, Grayson firmly placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "He's coming with me," he declared with the unwavering authority that had built his reputation in the business world. "He's the one who treated my mother." Upon entering the room, they found a scene of controlled scientific commotion. 3 doctors surrounded Meredith's bed, each focused on a different aspect of her condition. Cardiac monitors emitted rhythmic beeps, machines recorded blood pressure and oxygenation readings. The neurologist Grayson had encountered earlier was taking rapid notes as an ophthalmologist, carefully examined Meredith's eyes, now partially covered by light bandages. The professional's expressions oscillated between intense concentration and barely concealed awe. When they noticed Grayson and Jasper's presence, there was a moment of professional hesitation, clearly debating internally how much they could or should reveal in the child's presence. Grayson approached the bed, his heart racing as he saw his mother conscious for the first time since the morning's incident. Meredith was pale but serene, her breathing regular, her hands resting calmly on the hospital sheet. There was something different about her expression, a quality Grayson couldn't quite name, but that provoked a strange emotion within him, something akin to hope, but tempered by the fear of allowing himself to believe. "Mom?" he called softly, taking her hand in his. "I'm here. How are you feeling?" The ophthalmologist, a middle-aged woman with a serious expression and precise movements, approached Grayson as the other doctors continued with their evaluations. In a low voice, she explained that they were about to remove Meredith's light bandages from her eyes for a more comprehensive assessment. Preliminary analyses had revealed something extraordinary. The severely damaged cornea, that had been the cause of Meredith's blindness, was showing signs of regeneration that defied medical explanation. Chemical burns of that severity were considered irreversible by current medicine. The scarring of corneal tissue was permanent. However, microscopic examinations indicated a cellular restructuring happening in real time, as if the tissue were being reconstructed following an original blueprint long lost. The doctor chose her words with extreme care, avoiding fueling false hopes, while simultaneously acknowledging the inexplicable before her trained eyes. "I've never seen anything like it in my entire career," admitted the ophthalmologist, her gaze alternating between Grayson and Jasper with growing curiosity. "We would like to proceed with removing the bandages now, if you consent." Grayson nodded silently, his throat suddenly too dry to form words. Jasper moved closer to the other side of the bed, his eyes fixed on Meredith's face with unwavering intensity. There was a strange symmetry to that moment. Grayson holding his mother's right hand, Jasper gently touching her left, like pillars of different worlds sustaining a bridge between science and something older, deeper. The ophthalmologist proceeded with meticulous care, slowly removing the bandages protecting Meredith's eyes. The entire room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Even the beeps of the monitors appeared to decrease in volume, as if the technology itself recognized the gravity of the moment. When the last layer of gauze was removed, the doctor gently instructed Meredith to keep her eyes closed for a few moments while adjusting the room's lighting to a more comfortable level, reducing the intensity of the fluorescent lights. The neurologist approached, prepared to record any neurological reactions or responses. All eyes in the room were fixed on Meredith's serene face, awaiting what seemed like a suspended moment between impossibilities. "Now, Mrs. Meredith, please try to open your eyes slowly," the ophthalmologist instructed, her professional voice unable to completely mask the underlying tension. "Don't worry if you can't do it immediately. We'll go at your pace." The silence that followed was almost tangible. Meredith frowned slightly in concentration, her eyelashes fluttering with the initial effort. She seemed to be struggling against long-forgotten muscles, relearning basic commands she hadn't used meaningfully in 15 years. Grayson unconsciously squeezed her hand, as if he could transfer his own strength to help her in this effort. On the other side, Jasper remained absolutely motionless, only his lips moving in silent prayers. Slowly, painfully, Meredith's eyelids began to part. First, just a sliver, then a little more. Her eyes, once dull and unfocused, now blinked repeatedly, adjusting to the ambient light like an old camera being reactivated after years of disuse. The ophthalmologist leaned in to examine the pupils, but before she could complete her assessment, something extraordinary happened. Meredith's eyes, which for 15 years had seen only darkness, suddenly focused. They didn't wander randomly around the room as would be expected from someone newly emerged from long blindness. They fixed directly, precisely, on her son's face. A moment of pure, unmistakable recognition. Tears began to stream freely down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of pain. They were the liquid expression of an emotion so profound that it transcended words. The doctors watched in absolute awe, assessment instruments forgotten in their hands. The heart monitor registered an acceleration in beats, but it was merely the heart responding to the emotional overload of the moment. "Grayson, my son, I can see you," Meredith exclaimed. Her voice choked with emotion, her hands trembling as they reached up to touch the face of the son she could finally see after 15 years of darkness. The moment that followed, transcended medical protocols and emotional restraints. Grayson, the ever-composed businessman, broke down in tears, embracing his mother with the abandonment of a child reuniting with a lost love. Meredith alternated between touching her son's face and looking around, her eyes voraciously absorbing the colors, shapes, and faces that had been mere tactile memories for so long. The doctors exchanged glances of perplexity and awe, clearly witnessing something that defied their scientific understandings. It was Meredith who first noticed Jasper, still standing silently on the other side of the bed. Her newly awakened eyes settled on the young healer, a grateful smile illuminating her face. "Jasper," she called softly, extending her hand to the boy. "Come here, my little angel." Grayson, still enveloped in the emotional haze of the moment, suddenly recalled the boy's presence. All the accusations, all the anger, all the distrust dissolved instantly in the face of the undeniable miracle he was witnessing. With an impulsive motion, he extended his arm, enveloping Jasper in the embrace he shared with his mother. The three formed a perfect circle of connection. The man who had spent 15 years seeking redemption, the woman who had just emerged from darkness, and the child who had brought light through ancestral knowledge that modern science was only beginning to glimpse. Around them, the medical team observed with a mixture of professional astonishment and human emotion. Words like inexplicable, unprecedented, and miracle were whispered among the professionals. The visibly shaken ophthalmologist approached with the intention of conducting further examinations, but hesitated, reluctant to interrupt a moment of such profound significance. "We will need to conduct a series of tests to confirm the extent and stability of the recovery," she finally said, her professional voice softened by emotion. "But what we are witnessing here, frankly, there is no conventional medical explanation for this." While the extraordinary scene unfolded inside the hospital room, no one noticed the figure observing through the small window in the door. A man of average height, dressed in simple but clean clothes and with dark hair carefully combed back, watched with peculiar interest. His eyes were not fixed on the miraculously healed patient or the perplexed doctors, but on Jasper's small figure. The gaze contained a disturbing mixture of greed and cold calculation, completely out of place in the context of such a transcendent moment. As nurses and doctors hurried along the corridor, no one paid particular attention to yet another visitor apparently awaiting news. He overheard fragments of excited conversations about a miraculous cure, a patient who had regained her sight after 15 years of total blindness, a boy with extraordinary medical knowledge. Each piece of information was carefully recorded and evaluated, like pieces of a lucrative puzzle being assembled in his mind. A slow, malicious smile formed on his lips as he recognized the small figure being embraced by the family, as the boy he had abandoned months earlier, considering him a useless burden after his mother's death. "So this is where you've been hiding, my little treasure," he muttered to himself, discreetly retreating to avoid being noticed. "Your stepfather has plans for you." Spring enveloped the Grayson mansion with vibrant colors and sweet aromas, reflecting the new life blossoming not only in the gardens but also within the house. 6 weeks had passed since the miracle at the hospital. Enough time for news of Meredith's extraordinary recovery to be thoroughly investigated by the medical community and cautiously disseminated in scientific circles. Grayson had hired lawyers to initiate the legal process of adopting Jasper, determined to provide the boy with the family stability he deserved. Mornings at the mansion now had a harmonious routine, Grayson working in his home office, Meredith rediscovering the world through her brushes, and Jasper alternating between his lessons with private tutors and the dedicated care of his medicinal plants in the greenhouse Grayson had specially built for him. A subtle transformation had occurred in Grayson. The guilt he had carried for 15 years finally giving way to a serenity few had witnessed in him. "I never imagined happiness could return so completely to our lives," Grayson commented to Meredith one morning, watching through the window as Jasper worked focused in the greenhouse. "That boy brought back more than just your sight, Mother." Meredith had started painting again with renewed passion, her rediscovered eyes absorbing colors and shapes with the enthusiasm of someone receiving an unexpected gift. Her studio, a spacious room with perfect natural lighting that Grayson had kept intact throughout all the years of her blindness, now vibrated with colorful canvases, in various stages of completion. The predominant theme in her new works was light. Light piercing through foliage, light reflected in dewdrops, light dancing among clouds on the horizon. Every brushstroke celebrated her miraculous recovery, a visual gratitude expressed through art. Meredith often invited Jasper to observe her working, fascinated by the boy's knowledge of natural pigments that could be extracted from specific plants. This exchange of knowledge, she sharing artistic techniques, her teaching about the properties of plants, strengthened the bond between them, a connection that transcended blood ties. "Grayson is different, lighter," Meredith commented to Jasper as she applied delicate brushstrokes to a canvas depicting the sunrise. "You healed more than just my eyes, little one. You freed his heart." What neither of them realized, however, was that eyes were watching the mansion from afar, studying every detail of their daily routines. Harlan, Jasper's stepfather, had quietly followed the news of the medical miracle circulating in restricted groups. It hadn't been difficult to locate the boy after discovering his whereabouts at the hospital. A few strategic bribes to local staff revealed Grayson's identity and address. For 2 full weeks, Harlan observed the property from different strategic points, meticulously documenting the schedules of all residents and staff. He noticed that Grayson usually went out on Mondays and Wednesdays for external meetings, that Meredith rarely left the property except for medical appointments accompanied by her son, and that Jasper spent most afternoons alone in the greenhouse at the back of the garden. With calculated patience, Harlan waited for the perfect moment, planning every detail of his operation with the precision of a predator. "The boy is worth more than gold," he murmured to himself, watching through binoculars as Jasper worked intently with his plants. "I was a fool to abandon him before, but now I know exactly how to use his gift." On a particularly sunny Tuesday, the opportunity Harlan had been waiting for finally presented itself. Grayson had exceptionally gone out to resolve adoption-related matters. Meredith was resting in her room after an intense morning of painting, and most of the staff were occupied in the main house. Jasper was alone in the greenhouse, completely absorbed in cultivating rare seedlings that Grayson had specially acquired for him. The boy conversed softly with the plants as he watered and pruned them. A practice he had explained was an important part of the healing process, recognizing the vital energy in every living being and respecting it. His concentration was so deep that he did not immediately notice the silent footsteps approaching from behind. When he finally sensed the strange presence and turned around, his stepfather Harlan's familiar face emerged from the shadows of a row of tall plants, paralyzing him with fear. Before he could cry for help, Harlan covered his mouth with one hand while the other applied a cloth soaked in a sedative substance to his nose. "Hello, little healer," Harlan whispered with false gentleness as the boy briefly struggled before succumbing to unconsciousness. "Your stepfather missed you. We have big plans for you." Jasper's absence was only noticed almost 2 hours later, when Meredith came down to invite him for the afternoon snack. Not finding him in the house, she naturally headed to the greenhouse, his favorite spot. The glass door was ajar, swinging gently with the afternoon breeze. Meredith called out for him a few times, her voice echoing among the meticulously organized rows of plants. The silence that answered immediately awakened her maternal instinct. Her now perfectly functional eyes caught subtle signs of disturbance, some seedlings knocked over, drag marks on the dirt floor, and most alarmingly, Jasper's little notebook of observations lying next to a workbench. That notebook, a gift from Grayson, rarely left the boy's hands. It contained all his notes on medicinal plants, ancestral recipes, and new experiments. Meredith felt her heart race with a terrible premonition as she bent down to retrieve the notebook. "Something is very wrong," she murmured, clutching the notebook to her chest as she hurried back into the house. Jasper would never leave this behind voluntarily. Within minutes, the mansion transformed into a center of frantic searches. Grayson was immediately contacted and returned to the property in record time, his normally controlled face now distorted by panic. The security team mobilized to check every inch of the vast grounds, while the surveillance camera footage was urgently reviewed. One of them had captured a distant image of a man carrying what appeared to be a sleeping child towards the side wall of the property, where a section temporarily obscured by tall bushes offered a blind spot in the security system. Grayson watched the footage repeatedly, his expression hardening with each viewing. For him, the conclusion was clear. Jasper had not simply wandered off or run away. He had been methodically kidnapped by someone who knew the property and its security vulnerabilities well. Who would do this? Who would know about Jasper and his gifts? He questioned anguishedly, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration. We need to find him before it's too late. As the authorities were notified and a formal search operation began to organize, Meredith sat silently in Jasper's room, the notebook open in her lap. Her eyes scanned the pages filled with the boy's careful handwriting, detailed drawings of plants, and notes in a mixture of Portuguese and words from his tribe's native language. Memories of the conversations they had had in the past few weeks flowed through her mind, especially the moments when Jasper, feeling safe and welcomed, had shared fragments of his painful past. She remembered how the boy had mentioned his stepfather, the fear in his eyes as he described the man who had abandoned him, the stories about shady business dealings involving smuggling goods across borders, the abandoned warehouses he used to store illegal products. One specific detail suddenly emerged from her memory. Jasper had once described a particularly large warehouse near a stream, with an old faded sign for a furniture company on the facade, where his stepfather frequently met with dangerous people. "Grayson!" Meredith called out, rising with the notebook firmly gripped in her hands. "I think I know who took Jasper and possibly where he is." In an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, Jasper regained consciousness, tied to a chair with ropes that chafed his skin. The place reeked of mold and chemicals. Through his blurred vision, he made out corroded metal walls and broken windows covered with cardboard. Harlan was pacing a few meters away, speaking enthusiastically on the phone. The boy remained still, pretending to still be unconscious while he listened. "Yes, I have the boy. In 3 days we'll be out of the country with fake documents. He's going to make us millionaires with those miracle drugs. The price? $1 million to start, but it's just the beginning of our fortune." The hours after Jasper's disappearance transformed Grayson's mansion into an improvised operations center. Maps scattered across tables, phones ringing incessantly, police officers coming and going with preliminary reports. Grayson, his eyes red from lack of sleep, coordinated private search teams that complemented the official work of the authorities. Meredith, sitting by his side, meticulously recalled every conversation she had with Jasper, trying to extract from her memory any fragment of information that could lead to the boy's whereabouts. She had provided the police with a detailed description of Harlan based on Jasper's accounts, allowing a composite sketch to be distributed to all patrols. The mansion's security cameras had only partially captured the moment of the abduction, but they were enough to confirm that it was an adult man carrying an unconscious child, information that reinforced the gravity of the situation in the eyes of the authorities. "He mentioned several places, Grayson," Meredith explained, pointing to locations on a map of the region. "Abandoned warehouses, old storage facilities, always near quick escape routes. The first day of searches ended without concrete results. Each address investigated proved to be just another dead end, increasing frustration and despair." Grayson barely touched the food offered to him, consumed by guilt for not having foreseen the danger. In his tormented mind, he incessantly replayed the security measures he could have implemented, the signs he should have noticed. Meredith, although devastated, maintained a surprising calm, as if her newly recovered vision brought with it an inner clarity that transcended panic. During the early morning hours, when she finally convinced Grayson to rest for a few hours, she remained in Jasper's room, leafing through his notebook again. Among sketches of plants and medicinal formulas, she found small personal writings, thoughts, fears, and hopes that the boy rarely verbalized. On one page, he mentioned how his stepfather often spoke about overseas business, and how there were important people at the port who could make anyone disappear from the country without a trace. "The port," Meredith whispered, a new urgency in her voice as she woke Grayson. "Grayson, he may be planning to take Jasper out of the country through the port." The second day brought renewed intensity to the searches. The police expanded the investigation to port areas, checking records of vessels scheduled to depart in the next few hours. Grayson used his influential contacts to access information that would normally require warrants: suspicious financial movements, ticket reservations, commercial property rentals. Meredith, for her part, insisted on personally visiting every warehouse near the port that matched Jasper's descriptions, accompanied by undercover officers. The tension grew with every hour without news, time slipping like fine sand through their fingers. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in deep shades of red, hope began to falter. That's when the call came. A port informant, swayed by the substantial reward offered by Grayson, reported suspicious activity in an old warehouse near the cargo terminal. A man matching Harlan's description had been seen entering and leaving multiple times in the past few hours, always agitated and constantly checking his surroundings. "It's our best lead so far," Grayson declared, already grabbing his coat and keys. "We're going personally. I don't trust anyone else to do this right." The operation was set up in record time. Unmarked police vehicles strategically positioned themselves around the warehouse, keeping enough distance to avoid alerting the suspects. Grayson insisted on leading the initial approach, his unwavering determination silencing any objection from the officers in charge. When Meredith declared that she would also go, her son tried to dissuade her, arguing about the potential dangers of the situation. But there was a resolution in her expression that Grayson immediately recognized. The same determination that had sustained her during 15 years of darkness, the same strength that had allowed her to rebuild her life after the tragedy. Wearing a bulletproof vest under her coat, and with strict instructions to remain in the rear, Meredith joined the team, cautiously approaching the dilapidated warehouse. The old building, with its corroded metal walls and broken windows, stood out against the twilight horizon of the harbor, a threatening silhouette against the reddened sky. "He's in there, I can feel it," Meredith murmured, her heart racing as they approached. "Jasper needs to know we haven't abandoned him." The plan was simple. One team would cover the main entrance while another positioned themselves at the back, blocking potential escape routes. Grayson and two officers silently approached a side window, hoping to get a view of the interior before acting. Through the dirty, broken glass, the scene unfolding caused a wave of icy fury in Grayson. Jasper was sitting in a chair in the center of the warehouse, hands tied behind his back, his face pale and haggard. Around him, Harlan and two other men were carrying boxes to a van parked inside the warehouse itself. On an improvised table, Grayson glimpsed papers that appeared to be documents and passports. On an adjacent table, vials and rudimentary laboratory equipment were being carefully packed. Their conversation, partially audible through the cracks in the window, confirmed the most terrible suspicions. They were planning to leave that same night on a cargo ship, taking Jasper to establish a clandestine laboratory abroad, where they would explore his medicinal knowledge far from any legal interference. "We have to act now before they take him to the ship," Grayson whispered to the officer beside him. "Every minute counts." The signal was given, and the operation began with military precision. Police officers burst in simultaneously through all the warehouse entrances, weapons drawn, orders to surrender echoing in the vast space. The initial surprise worked perfectly. Harlan's two accomplices were quickly subdued with no chance to react. But Harlan, with the agility born of years living on the margins of the law, reacted instantly. In a quick motion, Harlan placed Jasper in front of him, holding him firmly by the shoulders and threatening him with a blade, using the boy as a shield. His eyes, cold and calculating, quickly assessed the situation, searching for an escape route. The officers froze, weapons aimed but unable to shoot without risking the child's life. Grayson, who had entered right after the initial team, felt his blood run cold as he saw the blade pressed against Jasper's delicate skin. The boy, though visibly exhausted and frightened, maintained a surprising calm, his eyes meeting Grayson's in silent communication. "Back off, or the boy dies," Harlan shouted, slowly backing toward a side door that gave direct access to the pier. "Kai's worth more to me alive, but I won't hesitate if necessary." With Jasper firmly held against him, Harlan managed to reach the side door, pushing it open with his back while keeping his eyes fixed on the cautiously advancing officers. The cold sea air hit them as they stepped out onto the old wooden pier extending over dark waters. The harbor lights created rippling reflections on the water's surface, while the scent of brine mingled with the odors of fuel and fish. Grayson followed at a safe distance, signaling for the officers to surround the perimeter. Meredith, who had initially remained in her designated position, now moved stealthily among abandoned containers, approaching from an angle Harlan couldn't see. The kidnapper continued to back away along the pier, dragging Jasper with him, the knife still dangerously close to the boy's neck. His panting breath and the sweat rolling down his face betrayed the growing desperation of his situation. "Don't be a fool, Harlan," Grayson tried to negotiate, hands raised in a placating gesture as he advanced slowly. "The pier is surrounded. There's no way out. Let the boy go, and we can talk." A small boat rocked gently at the end of the pier, clearly the next stage of the planned escape. Harlan cast alternating glances between his goal and his pursuers, calculating increasingly scarce odds. Grayson realized the man was cornered, and therefore more dangerous than ever. The tension grew with every passing second, the air almost vibrating with tragic possibilities. It was then that something unexpected happened. Meredith emerged from behind a container, positioning herself so Jasper could see her. Their eyes met, and a silent communication seemed to flow between them. Jasper nodded almost imperceptibly, as if receiving unspoken instructions. Then he closed his eyes and began to murmur words in his tribe's ancient tongue, the same ritual words he had used during Meredith's healing process. Harlan, disconcerted, shook the boy roughly. "Be quiet, what do you think you're doing?" "You fools, your tricks won't work now," he shouted, the pressure of the knife intensifying slightly against Jasper's skin. Taking advantage of the confusion, Jasper bit down hard on Harlan's arm and stomped on his foot. When the man loosened his grip, the boy broke free and ran across the slippery pier. Harlan pursued him with the knife in hand, while Grayson and the officers advanced. Meredith ran to intercept the boy. In the commotion, Jasper tripped and fell into the dark waters. Without hesitation, three figures simultaneously dove in: Harlan, Grayson, and Meredith. "I can't see them," an officer shouted, shining his flashlight over the churning surface. "The water's too dark." The long minutes that followed the triple dive seemed an eternity to the officers crowded at the pier's edge, frantically sweeping their flashlights across the dark waters. The silence was broken by the sound of displaced water, followed by desperate gasping for air. A figure emerged from the darkness, arms firmly wrapped around a smaller body. It was Grayson, battling the current while keeping Jasper above the surface with superhuman determination. The boy's face was pale, eyes closed, body limp. Officers immediately knelt at the pier's edge, reaching out to assist in the rescue. Through combined effort, they managed to pull Jasper's body first, then Grayson, who could barely breathe from the extreme exertion. Just a few meters away, two other officers dragged a struggling, coughing Harlan from the water, his face a mask of impotent fury at realizing he had lost. On the pier, an officer was already performing resuscitation procedures on Jasper, rhythmic compressions on his small chest while another checked his vital signs. Meredith, aided by a third police officer, emerged from the water on another part of the pier, her gaze fixed on the resuscitation scene, lips moving in silent prayer. "Breathe, please breathe," Grayson pleaded, kneeling beside the boy, ignoring the water streaming from his own drenched clothes. "Don't take him from us now. Not after all this." After agonizing moments, Jasper finally reacted with a strong cough, expelling water as his eyes slowly opened. A wave of relief swept through the group as the boy was quickly wrapped in thermal blankets and prepared for immediate transport to the hospital. Grayson refused treatment for himself, insisting on remaining by Jasper's side throughout the ambulance ride. Meredith, despite the paramedics' protests, also boarded, firmly holding the boy's hand during the journey. Harlan, handcuffed and furious, was taken separately under heavy police escort, his looks of hatred completely ignored by Grayson, whose attention was entirely focused on Jasper's well-being. In the ambulance, the boy oscillated between consciousness and unconsciousness, but each time his eyes opened, they seemed to immediately seek out Grayson's and Meredith's faces, as if to confirm he wasn't dreaming, that he had truly been rescued. "I knew you would come," Jasper whispered in a moment of lucidity, his voice hoarse from swallowed water and exhaustion. "I saw it in my dreams, you diving to save me." At the hospital, Jasper underwent a battery of tests while Grayson and Meredith, now dry and wearing clothes provided by the hospital staff, waited anxiously in the hallway. The doctor who finally came to meet them brought reassuring news. Despite the physical and emotional trauma, Jasper showed no permanent damage. The swallowed water had not caused significant lung damage, and his body temperature had already stabilized. The boy would need rest and possibly some psychological support due to the trauma of the kidnapping, but his physical recovery would be complete. Grayson heard the prognosis with inexpressible relief, while Meredith silently thanked Jasper's surprisingly resilient little body. When they were finally able to enter the room where the boy was resting, they found him sitting on the bed, his distant gaze fixed on the window, as if searching for something beyond the visible horizon. When he noticed their presence, his face lit up with a tired but genuine smile. It was at this moment of reconnection, in this silence laden with unspoken emotion, that Grayson made a decision that had been maturing in his heart since he had met the boy. "Jasper, I have something important to tell you," Grayson began, sitting on the edge of the bed and gently taking the boy's hands in his. "While you were away from us, I managed to expedite the proceedings for your adoption." Jasper's expression turned to astonishment as Grayson explained that, thanks to his influence and the extraordinary circumstances of the case, the adoption process that would normally take months had been urgently approved. Officially, legally, Jasper was now his son. The boy remained silent for long seconds, processing the information, silent tears forming in his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of emotions, gratitude, relief, and something deeper, a sense of belonging that he had lost when his mother died and his world crumbled. Meredith approached, forming a family circle around the hospital bed, her hands gently caressing the boy's dark hair as she explained that now he would have not only a father, but also a grandmother who loved him deeply. The moment transcended words. Three people whom fate had brought together through extraordinary circumstances, now officially united as a family. "Family," Jasper murmured, testing the word as if savoring something precious and almost forgotten. "I thought I'd never have a family again." Time passed, gradually transforming the dramatic rescue into a memory that lost its terror. Life in the mansion established new rhythms and routines, now centered not only on Grayson's business empire, but also on Jasper's development and education. The boy attended a prestigious school, where he quickly excelled not only in natural sciences as expected, but also in mathematics and literature. His teachers often commented on his extraordinary ability to connect knowledge from different disciplines, finding patterns and relationships that escaped most students. But the true blossoming of his talent occurred after school hours, in the modern laboratory that Grayson had built on the property, specially designed for Jasper to study and develop his knowledge of botany and traditional medicine. Equipped with state-of-the-art instruments, alongside traditional tools similar to those his grandmother had used, the laboratory became the boy's favorite refuge. There he methodically catalogued the ancestral knowledge he carried, now complemented by modern scientific research. Science does not contradict traditional knowledge. It merely offers another language to explain it, Jasper explained to Grayson one afternoon as he analyzed the chemical composition of a medicinal plant. "My grandmother spoke of plant spirits. Science speaks of bioactive compounds." Fully recovered and more vibrant than ever, Meredith divided her time between painting, which she had resumed with renewed passion, and assisting Jasper in his work. Her artistic skills proved valuable in visually documenting the plants studied by the boy, creating detailed illustrations that captured nuances that scientific photographs often missed. The relationship between grandmother and adopted grandson deepened, strengthened by the special bond they shared since the moment of his miraculous healing. Often, visitors to the mansion would find them working side by side in harmonious silence, she with her brushes, he with his plants and notes. Grayson observed this partnership with profound satisfaction, recognizing that his mother and Jasper shared a sensitivity and perception of the world that he, with his more pragmatic orientation, was only beginning to understand. The transformation in his life was evident to all who knew him. The man formerly obsessed exclusively with business and accumulation of wealth now found time for more meaningful matters, guided by values he had rediscovered through Jasper's quiet influence. "You have changed our family in ways I never imagined possible," Grayson confided to the boy during one of their evening strolls through the garden. "You came to be healed, but ended up being the one who healed us all." The idea for the foundation arose naturally from these transformations. During a family dinner, as Jasper enthusiastically described the promising results of a traditional remedy he was scientifically studying, Grayson suddenly realized the untapped potential they had at hand. The knowledge Jasper carried, combined with adequate resources for research and development, could benefit countless people who lacked access to conventional medical treatments. In the following weeks, meetings with lawyers, public health experts, and community leaders refined the initial vision. Thus was born the Meredith Blackwood Foundation, dedicated to the study, scientific validation, and preservation of indigenous traditional medicine. The main objective would be to develop medicines based on ancestral knowledge and distribute them free of charge to underprivileged communities. Despite his young age, Jasper was involved in every stage of the process, his unique knowledge being central to the institution's mission. "This would honor my grandmother and mother more than anything else," Jasper said when Grayson presented the full idea, his eyes shining with renewed purpose. "Knowledge should not be guarded or sold, but shared with those in need." The press conference to officially announce the creation of the foundation attracted considerable media attention. The extraordinary story behind its emergence, involving a medical miracle, a dramatic kidnapping, and a last-minute rescue, provided the kind of narrative that fascinated the public. Grayson, usually reserved in his rare previous public appearances, surprised aides and journalists with his openness and emotional eloquence. Alongside him on stage were Meredith, elegant and serene, and Jasper, serious and composed despite the curious glances directed at the Miracle Boy, as some newspapers had nicknamed him. Grayson explained the Foundation's mission, the initial projects already under development, and the long-term commitment to underprivileged communities. When a journalist questioned why a successful businessman would dedicate substantial resources to a project without financial return, Grayson offered an answer that captured the essence of his personal transformation. "Money does not bring happiness," he told the press, his gaze momentarily meeting Meredith's and Jasper's. "I have learned that true wealth lies in faith, love for one's neighbor, and the opportunities we have to do good." The celebration at the mansion after the Foundation's official inauguration was an intimate event, contrasting with the formality of the public ceremony. Only family and close friends were invited for a dinner, prepared with some ingredients from Jasper's own medicinal garden. The atmosphere was one of serene accomplishment, of completed cycles and new ones initiated. Grayson watched with profound satisfaction as Jasper interacted with growing confidence, explaining to curious visitors the principles behind some of the remedies the Foundation would begin producing. Meredith, seated in her place of honor at the table, occasionally touched the medallion she now always wore, a gift from Jasper containing minuscule amounts of the herbs that had restored her sight. They were a family built not by blood ties, but by equally profound connections of shared experiences, challenges overcome together, and love that transcended conventions. When the last guests had departed, and only the three of them remained in the living room, Grayson raised his glass in a private toast. "To our family and the Foundation. May they both grow strong and bring light to those in need," he proposed, his heart overflowing with gratitude for the unexpected path his life had taken. "May the past finally be able to rest in peace." The night wore on when an unexpected envelope arrived at the main gate. Grayson opened it upon returning to the room where Jasper and Meredith were conversing. Inside, a simple card contained a message that chilled his blood. "The boy has a gift more powerful than you can imagine. What heals can also destroy. Beware of what he truly is." As he looked up, he found Jasper watching him with an inscrutable expression, as if he already knew the content of the message. The years pass relentlessly, even behind bars. For Harlan, the years of seclusion had become a double prison. The physical one with its grey walls and inflexible routines, and the mental one built by bitterness and obsession with revenge. In the cell shared with 3 other inmates, his body aged prematurely, marked by deep wrinkles and eyes that rarely abandoned their calculating expression. The other prisoners instinctively avoided him, recognizing in him a darkness that transcended common crimes. That afternoon, as the inmates gathered to watch the news on the old television in the common area, a report captured their attention with disturbing force. On the screen, a now 15-year-old Jasper, with a surprisingly mature presence, presented new medications developed by the Meredith Blackwood Foundation. The boy Harlan had kidnapped had transformed into a young scientist, celebrated for innovatively combining ancestral knowledge with modern technology. By his side, Grayson and Meredith smiled with evident pride. "Damn them!" he muttered through clenched teeth, eyes fixed on the image of the empire that could have been his. "They stole my fortune, my future." The day of his release arrived with a cloudy sky and the promise of a storm. Harlan walked through the prison gates with only a backpack containing minimal belongings and a mind full of meticulous plans. His conditional release required him to regularly report to a supervisor, maintain a fixed residence, and hold a lawful job. Requirements he intended to meet only enough to avoid immediate suspicion. In a rundown hostel, he temporarily settled while reactivating old underworld contacts. Some had disappeared, others died in confrontations, but some remained, especially those who owed him favors from the past. With a false identity obtained through shady channels, he began to outline the contours of his plan. First, he needed substantial financial resources. Then he would approach the Blackwood family in disguise, carefully studying their routines, until finding the perfect moment to recover the treasure he considered rightfully his. Years planning every detail, he thought, observing the Foundation's headquarters from afar. This time I won't fail. The need for quick money to finance his plans led Harlan to a fatal mistake. Through intermediaries, he established contact with a trafficker, known for his growing influence in the local market and abundant resources. The proposal seemed perfect: privileged information about an alleged valuable cargo shipment in exchange for upfront payment. What Harlan did not foresee was the network of informants the trafficker maintained, including some in prison who had witnessed his obsession with the Blackwood Foundation. The meeting to finalize the deal was set in an abandoned industrial warehouse, ironically similar to the one where he had held Jasper captive years earlier. Harlan arrived confident, only to find himself surrounded by armed men and a furious trafficker who already knew his true intentions. The negotiation quickly deteriorated into brutal interrogation. When it became clear that Harlan did not possess the promised information, the trafficker ordered an exemplary punishment. The last sound Harlan heard before excruciating pain engulfed him was the pop of a bottle cap and a cold voice ordering, "The eyes. Let's see how long he survives on the streets without sight. Please no, anything but that," were his last words before the acid hit his eyes. Months later, an emaciated, unrecognizable figure dragged himself along the city sidewalks. Prematurely grayed and unkempt hair framed a partially disfigured face, marred by chemical scars, opaque eyes covered by a whitish film. Harlan had become just another among the countless invisibles inhabiting society's margins. His existence was reduced to begging for coins on street corners, sleeping in shelters when he got a spot, or huddling in stairwells when he didn't. The blindness, imposed as a sentence for his own betrayal, had transformed the once calculating and confident man into a fearful shadow, constantly startled by sounds he could not contextualize and dangers he could not anticipate. Destiny, with its peculiar irony, guided his hesitant steps to a particularly busy sidewalk, where hurried pedestrians occasionally dropped coins into his plastic cup. He was unaware that he was standing right in front of the Meredith Blackwood Foundation, the epicenter of his past obsession, now just another inaccessible building to his limited perception. "A coin, please," he mechanically repeated, his hoarse voice rarely finding a response. "Help a blind man for charity." At the end of a particularly difficult afternoon, with few donations and a light rain seeping through his tattered coat, Harlan felt a presence stop directly in front of him. Not the usual hurried footsteps that barely slowed down to drop a coin, but someone who deliberately interrupted their stride to observe him. A young, kind but confident voice broke his repetitive monologue of requests. It was Jasper, now 15 years old, leaving the foundation after a day's work. The teenager, with the heightened sensitivity he had always shown for the suffering of others, had noticed the beggar's intensified trembling under the increasing rain. Without recognizing in the disfigured man the villain who had once kidnapped him, he offered not only immediate help, but a possibility that sounded like an impossible miracle to Harlan's incredulous ears. "Come, sir. We have a new treatment for blindness that may help you," Jasper invited, gently extending his arm to guide the man. No one should face the darkness alone. In the Foundation's main laboratory, Jasper led the trembling beggar through bright corridors that Harlan perceived only as faint variations of light in his permanent darkness. The man did not recognize the voice of the boy who had grown up, nor did he associate the place with the empire he had once tried to steal for himself. He accepted the aid with the desperate gratitude of the truly destitute, for whom any kindness seems like an undeserved gift. Jasper methodically prepared the same remedy that years ago had restored Meredith's sight, his agile hands moving with the precision perfected by years of dedicated practice. As he worked, he explained the process to the unknown patient, the origin of the plants used, the combination of traditional knowledge with scientific validation. Harlan listened silently, a strange familiarity echoing in his confused mind. "This treatment connects ancient wisdom with modern science," Jasper explained, approaching with the prepared remedy, "but it works best when there is openness to true transformation." As the first drops touched his damaged eyes, Harlan felt the familiar sting that precedes profound changes. A soft light enveloped his face as Jasper recited the ancient ritual words learned from his grandmother. Gradually, like mist dissipating at dawn, shapes began to emerge from the darkness. First indistinct outlines, then blurred colors, and finally, with increasing clarity, the face of the young healer leaning over him. Recognition struck Harlan like a bolt. The same eyes, now in a more mature face, the same compassionate gaze that years ago had looked upon him with fear from the chair where they had kept him bound. The revelation was too much for his already fragile spirit. With a strangled cry, he fell to his knees, shaking uncontrollably. "You!" he exclaimed, shock giving way to an avalanche of conflicting emotions: shame, remorse, disbelief. "It can't be. I don't deserve." The confession came in an uncontrollable torrent. Before stunned staff and curious patients, Harlan revealed everything. The kidnapping years ago, the exploitation plans, even his recent intentions of revenge. Grayson and Meredith, who had been following the treatment of the anonymous beggar from a distance, slowly approached, gradual recognition giving way to astonishment. Harlan, now in complete emotional collapse, declared amid sobs his unworthiness in the face of the kindness received, the poetic justice of his fate, having lost the sight just as he had planned to exploit the gift that had restored the sight of others. "I don't deserve your kindness," he sobbed, head bowed before the trio he had once tried to destroy. "I've spent my life pursuing wealth at the expense of others, and the universe has given me exactly what I deserved." In a gesture that transcended ordinary understanding, Jasper gently placed his hand on the broken man's shoulder. His touch did not communicate condemnation, but genuine compassion that defied conventional logic. The words she uttered carried wisdom that surpassed her 15 years, echoing ancestral teachings passed down through generations of healers. "My grandmother always said that the universe has its own way of doing justice. But she also taught us that the true power of healing comes from forgiveness," she said simply, offering not easy absolution, but the possibility of redemption through service. Times later, the Meredith Blackwood Foundation celebrated a new anniversary with a small ceremony in the expanded medicinal gardens. Among the dedicated staff, working quietly between beds of healing plants, was a familiar yet transformed figure. Harlan, his hair now completely white and his vision only partially recovered, enough to work, insufficient to forget his journey, cultivated with reverent care the same plants he had once planned to exploit. His transformation was neither instantaneous nor simple. Each day represented a conscious choice to serve instead of take, to protect instead of destroy. As Grayson, Meredith, and Jasper watched from a distance, the former villain carefully taught a group of visiting children the names and properties of the medicinal plants, his face marked by external scars and internal healing. "The greatest miracle is not to restore sight to the eyes, but to the heart," Jasper reflected, observing the man who had once terrified him and who had now found purpose in humble service. Did you enjoy Grayson and Jasper's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and check out the next one waiting for you right here on the screen. I'll see you there.